Welcome to the Cheating Secrets channel. We hope you enjoy today's story.
I've always been fascinated by the large glass panels that separate airplanes from passenger terminals at airports. I couldn't imagine how they manufactured such large pieces of glass or how they transported and installed them. Today, outside, nothing was moving. Nothing except snowflakes. They descended like little parachutes, swaying from side to side, big, heavy, wet flakes of white coldness. They started falling about 2 hours ago. It was shortly before I was supposed to fly out on a 3-day business trip. The last message over the internal communication system indicated that the delay would last at least another 2 hours. The snowplows managed to clear it, but it was too heavy for the planes to take off. Castleberry Airport wasn't that big, but its location was convenient for use as a hub for flights from various airlines. I called home several times to let my wife, Marcia, know about the delay, but no one answered. I figured she had gone out to clear the driveway. She thought it was better to clear light snow 3 or 4 times than once with a thick layer. Usually, I was the one shoveling, so I was partly glad she could enjoy it while I wasn't there. Marcia and I had been happily married for 22 years. We had 2 sons who were in college, so when I had to go on trips, she would stay home alone. Occasionally, she would join us if it was an interesting place, but usually, she preferred to stay home. The best part of the trips was the sex on return home when I got back. It always seemed worth the separation. After a while, watching the snow had a slightly hypnotic effect on me. Stretching my legs seemed like a good idea, so I wandered into the VIP lounge. I recognized one fellow traveler sitting at a table with 3 other stranded souls. He noticed me as I entered and waved. "Eddie, come sit and join the Broken Hearts Club," he said. I remembered his name was Duncan, but I hadn't met the others before. "I suppose you're all Hank Williams fans?" "Sorry, Eddie. You missed the mark with that assumption." "Hi, I'm Archie." The biggest guy at the table extended his hand in greeting. The rest of the group quickly followed suit. The truth is, we're all victims of cheating wives. When we realized that, we formed this club. It all happened, of course, within the last hour. The explanation was met with a chorus of groans and cynical laughter around the table. The youngest guy in the group, who introduced himself as Bryce, waved the waitress over and ordered another round of drinks. By that point, they were about 3 rounds ahead of me, so I was the only one who was completely sober. At best, I was a lousy drunk. As the newest member, I was expected to foot the bill for the last round. "Sorry, guys. I'd love to sit and chat about your marital woes, but I can't join your club because I'm happily married." Cedric, the oldest member of the group, found this amusing. After a sarcastic but friendly laugh, he surveyed those seated at the table. "I think our new member denies it." It turned out that this light-hearted teasing was the beginning of my induction into the informal, impromptu group, but I didn't mind. After about 10 minutes of casual chatter, Bryce looked at me. "So, Eddie, tell us, what's your loving wife up to while we chat? And what's your secret to making her happy?" "Well, since it's still snowing, I suppose she's shoveling the driveway." "Why do you think she's doing that?" "Well, she's not answering either the home phone or her cell. She must be outside." "Did she usually expect you to call her at this time?"
No.
"Usually, I wait until I'm settled in, maybe tomorrow morning." A low groan spread across the table after I said that. They all expressed disbelief at my statement. What the hell are you trying to say?" Cedric decided to speak up. "Let me clarify. You're leaving home, going on a trip, out of town for a week, and your wife, out of the blue, is unreachable on either the home or cell phone. Does this often happen? Typically?" "What do you mean?" "Think about it. How often does your wife end up in a situation where you can't reach her on either phone?" "Never. That's why I think she's shoveling the driveway." I was rewarded with another round of groans. I pulled out my cell and dialed our home phone and Marcia's cell. Neither answered. Eventually, I had to contend with 4 smirks from 4 cynical drunks. Screw it. I needed another drink. I tried to come up with a way to get the guys off my back for a while. "How did you, vagabonds, manage to get so bitter about all this?" "Many couples break up. Nowadays, it doesn't matter much." "Well, we all split up because our wives had affairs." None of them were what you'd call typical divorces. They were all the result of infidelity on the wife's part. And how did you all find out about these affairs? Archie seemed to volunteer to go first. One day, I was just about to head to work when I overheard the end of a conversation my wife was having. All I caught were the words hot tub and wine. In the weeks leading up to that, it had become a habit for my wife, Joan, to delete phone calls from her cell right after she finished. I noticed she was doing it, but up until that moment, I hadn't thought much about it. For some reason, everything seemed off. Given her recent behavior and snippets from the phone call, I became curious. I waited for her to leave the room, then picked up her phone. She had 8 speed dial numbers. They were all family or friends, except the last one. I couldn't understand why my wife would pre-program the number of a nail salon into her mobile phone. I wrote down the number, and when at work I had a feeling that one of the guys had heard this story before, but I couldn't wait to hear the rest. It wasn't difficult for my secretary to find out who actually owned the phone number for the nail salon. Todd Mitchell, a local real estate agent and family friend. I made a few phone calls and found out that there are only 2 motels in town with hot tubs, and only one room was booked for the day. I called my wife and asked if she wanted to meet for lunch. She said she couldn't because she needed to meet her friend Janet. Since that was utter nonsense, I figured she was planning to meet Todd during her lunch break. I saved his number in my cell and headed to the Rainbow Motel. Duncan ordered another round of drinks, but I switched to Coke. Archie continued his tale of his wife's escapades. Todd arrived at the motel before me and parked his Mercedes in front of room 117. I parked a few spots away from him. I had to wait just a few minutes until Joan's Civic pulled into the back parking lot. I stepped out of the car and leaned against the fender. The expression on her face was unforgettable when she saw me. She knew I had seen her, and she had no choice but to park and get out. She desperately tried to convince me that Janet had met her there, and they were just planning to carpool to the restaurant. I didn't say anything, just smiled. She fell silent, and I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the new pre-programmed number. When Todd answered, I said, "Joan will be a little late today, and they'll tow your car." My wife stood with her mouth agape as Todd jerked open the door to the motel room to see what was happening with his Mercedes. By then, I was already standing at the door. When he rushed out, he tripped over my outstretched leg and fell face first. A swift kick to the groin sealed the deal. I calmly got into my car and drove to the lawyer's office. 6 months later, I was a free man, and so was Todd. I suppose you had no idea anything was going on until you accidentally overheard part of the conversation? Exactly, Eddie. Later I found out they had been together for almost a year. I trusted my wife, and I had no reason to doubt her faithfulness. There's no one more trusting than a loving husband. Duncan stretched in his chair, unsuccessfully trying to turn it into a recliner. Maybe you should give your wife another call, Eddie. Perhaps she's finished shoveling by now. When neither the home phone nor her cell answered, I was rewarded with a chorus of groans and eye rolls. Bryce leaned over the table. "Eddie, do you have a neighbor you could call, just to make sure everything's okay?" Flipping through the small phone book I kept in my coat pocket, I called the old man who lived across the street. He was retired and enjoyed being the eyes and ears of the neighborhood. Cedric ordered another round of drinks. He also switched to Coke. So, what the hell did he say? I didn't notice who asked the question. Marcia left the house about 2 hours ago, right when the snowstorm started. He hasn't seen her since. The driveway and sidewalk haven't been cleared. As expected, a loud, prolonged groan echoed around the table. It was as if they were all saying at once, "I told you so." It was Bryce's turn to entertain the group. Well, at least I saw it coming. I don't know how long it had been going on before I started noticing the little things. Sandy and I had 3 kids in high school, and I was traveling much more than I should have. The only good thing was that she kept the affair secret from the kids and never brought the guy to the house. At least, I don't think she ever did. Eventually, I staged a trip out of town to check everything out. It was pretty straightforward. He picked her up at the mall, and they drove to a motel about 20 minutes from our house. I watched from the sidelines as they took the elevator to the 3rd floor. I'm a pretty calm guy, but I'll resort to violence if I feel it's necessary. I went home from the motel and grabbed a cooler with soda, a crossword puzzle, a baseball bat, and a lawn chair. I wasn't in a hurry to go back to the motel. Duncan ordered a large plate of nachos at the bar. Bryce continued his story. The porter gave me a strange look when I entered, but didn't say anything. I positioned myself right by the elevator door on the 3rd floor and waited. I made sure to relieve myself before leaving home, so I wouldn't have to leave my post. My reward came about 2 hours later. Sandy came out of the room with her friend and immediately spotted me sitting there. I recognized the guy as our neighbor from the next street over. He was married and had 2 kids. She darted back into the room, and I could tell she pulled him along by the way he moved. That wasn't quite how it happened, was it? No, but nothing really eventful occurred. For the next 15 minutes, he peeked out from behind the door a few times. He decided to stand up to me, but when he stepped out of the room, I stood up with a baseball bat in hand, and he quickly retreated. Finally, the motel manager took the elevator up. We argued for a few minutes. He asked me to leave, but I refused. Eventually, he threatened to call the police, and I told him it was a good idea. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. I told them I feared for her life, and that the assailant was holding her against her will. It was a ridiculous story, but it brought the cops into the room to talk to Sandy and her guy. 10 minutes later, the officers came out of the room. Their demeanor had softened a bit. In a hushed voice, one officer told me that my wife was afraid to come out of the room because of what she had done. She asked them if they could take her to her sister's house, but she wanted me to leave before she came out. I left and headed straight to my lawyer's office. She got the kids and the house, and I got freedom. Sandy's guy ended up being single too, but not by choice. Another round of drinks appeared. We hadn't received any news about the flight delay. Eddie, do you have any close family friends or acquaintances that Marcia could rely on while you're out of town? Duncan tried to be tactful, but the question still stung a bit. Most of our friends are married. The only guy I can think of is one of Marcia's old college buddies who just moved back to town about 6 months ago. She mentioned him a few times at first, but lately hasn't mentioned him at all. I didn't like him because he was a bit sleazy. How close were they in college? It was my turn to groan. He was in a fraternity. We all dug into the nachos, and Cedric began telling us about his wife. We were married for 23 years, Julie and I. We didn't have any children, and I traveled a lot for work. I was just returning from a 3-month job in Peru when everything went sideways. A day before heading back home, I got bitten by a nasty spider. The doctor prescribed me antibiotics, but I couldn't take them until I returned. We had a local pharmacist who knew everyone by name. When I was picking up, he asked if I wanted to pick up Julie's prescription too, since it was already ready. That wasn't the issue, but the pills were. I had a vasectomy 10 years prior, and my wife got the birth control prescription 2 days before I left for the trip. She had planned it in advance. It was hard for me to keep track of Cedric because I kept catching myself drifting off. His name was Travis Coates. He was handsome and seemingly wealthy. He drove a nice car and had a good job. For some reason, I had his address and phone number in my notebook. I still felt like he was a jerk, but I could see what Marcia might find attractive about him. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. I tried to focus on what Cedric was saying. I didn't tell Julie about the birth control pills. When I had the chance, I checked the cell phone bills for the past few months and reviewed the calls. 20 minutes after my plane took off 3 months ago, she called Langford Landscaping. It was the guy who used to mow our lawn. Terry Langford moved here from Kentucky with his wife and 3 kids. He started a lawn mowing company and gave it a trendy name. Over the past 3 months, Julie called him almost 30 times. There were no other suspicious calls on the list. The next morning, I called Terry. He wasn't home, but his wife was more than willing to talk to me. It seems Julie was paying Terry $50 each time he came to the house and serviced her. His wife didn't like it, but she said they needed the money to feed the kids. It wasn't her idea, but I still felt I needed some closure. I told his wife I'd be back the next day. By the time I got there the next morning, they were gone. I don't know if I was disappointed because I didn't get a chance to talk to him, or glad he was gone. 2 days later, I handed my wife divorce papers. We decided not to order more drinks. Well, Eddie, what have you decided to do? I know it sounds silly, but it doesn't seem like we'll be going anywhere for a while. With the snow piling up on the plains, how do you guys feel about a road trip? In this weather? You're out of your mind. Archie seemed less than thrilled. How far do you live from here, and what do you drive? Cedric was somewhat interested. I have a four-wheel drive Explorer, and I live less than an hour's drive from here, even in this weather. 5 minutes later, we were ready to go. Even Archie didn't mind. Bryce left his mobile phone number with the ticket agent so they could contact us. I parked the Ford in the Marriott customer parking lot at the terminal. Duncan entered Travis's address into the navigator, and we hit the road. It could have been a waste of time, but it was an engaging pursuit. Duncan, you still have something to tell us, and we're definitely a captive audience. Why don't you start? All this happened about 3 years ago. My wife Kelly and I were members of a social club. On weekends, we'd get together to dance, drink, and have dinner out. The guys usually played poker in the basement, while the women did their usual thing. This particular evening started off badly when I noticed Clayton Mankey had shown up. Kelly and Clayton had been close friends in high school 25 years ago. In fact, they were a steady couple for at least 2 years. Clayton finished college and left, but I always had a feeling that Kelly still thought about him. They danced a few times, and I could tell they were trying not to be too obvious about it. I noticed that while they were talking, Kelly kept glancing in my direction. I always positioned myself so it looked like I wasn't watching them. Once, I saw her say something and then glance at her watch. I thought that was interesting. Are we going to hear all this before we get to Eddie, Duncan? Patience, my good friends. I did a little chatting and found out that Clayton was staying in the penthouse at the Madison Inn Hotel. It seems he's done very well in the advertising business and wasn't shy about bragging about it. Trying not to be too obvious, I also found out that he was driving a white Lexus. It was getting close to 9 o'clock, when poker usually started. Kelly could always count on me to play, at least until midnight. I casually mentioned to my wife that I'd be heading downstairs soon, hoping she wouldn't object. Of course, she didn't object. A few minutes later, I noticed her looking across the room at Clayton. She raised her hand and showed 5 fingers, then 4. He smiled and nodded. It wasn't difficult to slip out the back door, get into my car, and drive to the Madison. I parked in an inconspicuous spot and went inside. It was easy to watch the parking lot, and 10 minutes later, a white Lexus pulled up. While Clayton escorted my wife into the lobby, I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. I patiently waited until he started heading back down to the lobby. The expression on my wife's face when the door opened was priceless. I looked at Clayton and said, "I'll head home early. When you're done with her, give her a ride home." As I stepped out of the elevator, I could no longer contain my anger. A quick punch with my right hand broke Clayton's nose. He landed flat on the floor. 10 minutes later, I was home, and 10 minutes after that, a taxi dropped off Kelly. She came in, looked at me, and ran to the bedroom. Later that night, I went to the emergency room, where they set my broken arm. I never thought hitting a guy in the face could injure my hand so badly. For months later, I got divorced. Wow, he finished right on time. Great story, Duncan. So, how close are we to the meeting point? Take a left in about 1.5 miles, Eddie. As we got closer, the group became more interested. The snow was still falling, but a bit slower now. None of the streets had been cleared yet. It was actually quite beautiful, but I wasn't in the mood to appreciate it. Guys, see that blue focus on the left? Yeah, is that it? I parked a few meters away from the focus and got out. With a quick swipe of my hand, I cleared the snow from the driver's door and opened it. She had left her purse on the passenger seat of the car. Her cell phone was inside, with 3 missed calls, all from me. By that time, all the guys had gotten out of the SUV. What are you gonna do, Eddie? Want to go inside? The 5 of us could really spook this guy. That's a good idea, Archie, but I think I'll keep it low-key. Maybe one of you guys could drive the SUV back to the parking lot? Duncan chimed in. No problem. We can just follow the GPS back if we get lost. Around that time, Bryce's cell phone rang. The flight was supposed to be ready in an hour. We had just enough time to head back. Cedric and Archie cleared all the snow off the van, and in no time, we were on our way to the airport. I parked the Focus next to the Explorer in the free lot. I wouldn't be here for just 5 days. By that time, Marcia would have figured out what happened. If she reported the van to the police, they would have easily found it. I'm sure she would have tried her hardest to come up with some explanation, but it would have been in vain. Tomorrow, I'll contact my lawyer. 6 months later, I'll become a member of the Club of Betrayed Hearts. The chances of all 5 guys getting together again were pretty slim, but we had an interesting evening. It took me over a year to destroy Travis. I used all the services that friends had provided me over the years. He built his career on brilliant talks, but he didn't have the skills and knowledge to back it up. I would have happily continued my revenge, but he disappeared overnight. The house was sold, and in the end, I had to give half of the proceeds to Marcia. She didn't get any alimony or pension money. Somehow, all our friends and relatives managed to find out the reason for the breakup. Marcia wasn't happy.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. And we'll see you on the Cheating Secrets channel.